Determiners exist in some schools of grammar as a separate part of speech. In this class, we'll call it an adjective, or a subcategory of an adjective, and determiners and adjectives both provide more information about nouns. Whereas adjectives are describing qualities or attributes of nouns, determiners are words that are placed in front of the noun to do one of two things: specify a quantity, or clarify what the noun refers to. So a determiner would be a word like those, or my, or some, or his, just to name a few. Whereas adjectives would be more like mean dogs, or young, or large, or mangy. Determiners might tell you a quantity, or they might clarify that when we're talking about dogs, we're talking about the dogs that are ours, or perhaps theirs. So here are some broad categories of determiners: articles like a, an, or the, demonstratives, this, that, these, and those, possessives like my, your, his, her, its, our, or they, quantifiers like few, much, many, most, some, any, several, more, every, and there's a bunch more. Numbers, count them up, 1, 2, 3, etc., or doubling or tripling. And interrogatives like whose, what, and which. And you should notice that 4 of these categories align with pronouns. So while we are trying to identify pronouns that serve the noun role and are just replacing nouns, same functions as nouns, we are also identifying pronouns that serve as determiners or as adjectives. So let's compare some determiners versus nouns. Same word, different functions. Those here is used to refer students and tell which students we're talking about. The ones that are over there, those students. And in this case, the word those is actually functioning like the subject. So this first example just clarifies which students we're talking about, whereas the second probably refers back to a noun in a previous sentence. Like maybe you were talking about candy bars, and you mentioned Snickers, and you said, oh, those are my favorite. So that is a classic pronoun in that it refers back to an antecedent. Sometimes we might use slightly different words. For example, my tells you which car you're referring to, versus mine is probably referring back to a car that was mentioned in a previous sentence. Here, several in front of a noun like students tells you which students, or clarifies the quantity of students that you're speaking of. Whereas in this second example, several probably refers back to a noun in the previous sentence, such as students, in a classic pronoun way functioning as a noun. Consider the difference between what book are you reading versus what are you reading. In this first example, what refers to the noun right after. In the second example, it's not necessarily a book. This question could still be replaced or answered with a noun, so it's functioning as an interrogative pronoun, but the top one is more of a determiner. And yet again, if we said many as a determiner, we're referring which students we're talking about, or the quantity of students. And if we said many by itself, it's functioning like a noun, like the subject. And presumably, it's referring back to a previous sentence. Of course, there do exist some pronouns, especially of the indefinite category, that don't have an antecedent and just function all by themselves. So a typical noun phrase is made up of a determiner, like the, an adjective like tall, and then a noun, boy. Notice if my sentence was something like the tall boy ran home, without the determiner the, does it make sense to say tall boy ran home? Though it's also possible to have a sentence with 0 determiners, like John ran home. Generally, though, these adjectives you can take out and the sentence will still make sense. But if a sentence has a determiner, taking it out might not always work. Sometimes yes, but not always. And it turns out the order of determiners matters too. We already mentioned that determiners typically come before adjectives, but you can have up to 1 predeterminer to go along with 1 main determiner and 1 or more post-determiners. So the noun phrase of a sentence might read, all those last few dollars, or both my younger sisters, or 3 times your salary, a little more red wine, another drink, the most money, the next 3 weeks, these first 3 seats, just to name a few potential combinations. So one last distinction to make. The, some, our, this, and John's tell you which specific tea, or how many, or how much tea. And good, tasty, delicious, savory, flavorful, and fine describe or give you qualities about the tea or characteristics of the tea. Determiners versus adjectives. And determiners are a subcategory of adjectives.